Thich Nhat Hanh had a different way of looking at suffering. He did not see suffering as something that must always be eliminated. He saw it as something that could be understood, embraced, and transformed. This is difficult to accept when you are hurting. When your heart is broken, you do not want a lesson. When you feel lonely, you do not want philosophy. When fear keeps returning, you simply want it to stop. But Thich Nhat Hanh invites us to look again. Because sometimes, beneath the suffering you desperately want to escape, there is something waiting to be understood. And sometimes, that understanding becomes the beginning of compassion, freedom, and a deeper kind of happiness. Most of us are taught to solve problems. If something hurts, fix it. If something makes you anxious, distract yourself. If you feel lonely, find something to occupy your mind. If you are angry, suppress it or release it as quickly as possible. We become very skilled at moving away from uncomfortable feelings. Modern life makes this easier than ever. There is always another message to answer, another video to watch, another task to complete, another conversation to have, another place to go. The moment silence appears, something quickly fills it. And sometimes this is not because we are busy. It is because we are afraid of what we might meet in the silence. Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching offers a very different possibility. Instead of immediately asking, "How do I get rid of this feeling?" we can become curious about it. What is actually happening inside me? What is this pain connected to? What am I believing right now? What am I afraid of losing? These questions do not make suffering disappear, but they change our relationship with it. The suffering is no longer an enemy standing outside of us. It becomes something we are willing to look at. That difference is enormous, because what we refuse to look at often remains powerful, and what we begin to understand can begin to change. Thich Nhat Hanh often described mindfulness as a way of recognizing what is happening in the present moment. This recognition is gentle. It does not say, "You should not feel this." It does not say, "Be positive." It does not say, "Move on." It simply says, in essence, "I know that suffering is here." That sounds simple, but imagine how different life becomes when you stop fighting every painful feeling. In his teachings on transforming anger, Thich Nhat Hanh used the image of a mother holding her crying baby. A mother does not become angry with the baby for crying. She does not throw the baby away. She holds the baby with tenderness. In the same way, he taught that mindfulness can hold difficult emotions with care. The purpose is not to approve of anger. It is not to become passive towards suffering. It is to create enough presence to understand what is underneath it. This distinction matters. Suppression says, "Go away." Mindfulness says, "I see you." Suppression pushes suffering deeper. Mindfulness gives us the possibility of looking into its roots. Thich Nhat Hanh described this process as stopping and looking deeply. First, we stop running. Then, we begin to see. And when we see clearly, transformation becomes possible. So perhaps the first question is not, "How can I stop suffering?" Perhaps it is, "Can I stay present long enough to understand what this suffering is trying to tell me?" Suffering often has more than one layer. Anger may appear on the surface. Underneath it may be hurt. Under the hurt may be fear. Under the fear may be attachment. And underneath attachment may be a deep desire to be loved, respected, understood, or safe. If we only react to the surface, we may never discover the root. This is why mindfulness matters. It allows us to look beneath the first reaction. Imagine someone criticizing you. You immediately become angry. Your mind creates a story. They do not respect me. They always treat me this way. They should know better. The anger becomes stronger. But if you look deeply, another truth may appear. Perhaps the criticism touched an old wound. Perhaps you have been carrying a fear of failure. Perhaps you desperately need other people to confirm your worth. The anger was real, but it was not the whole story. This is one reason Thich Nhat Hanh emphasized understanding. Understanding is not simply collecting information about yourself. It is seeing the roots of suffering directly. And when you see the roots, compassion can begin to appear. You may discover that the person who hurt you was also suffering. You may discover that you were reacting from fear. You may discover that the version of yourself you have been defending so fiercely was never as solid as you believed. This does not mean accepting harmful behavior. It does not mean allowing people to mistreat you. It means seeing more clearly. And clarity creates freedom. Because when you understand what is happening inside you, you are less likely to be controlled by it. So ask yourself quietly, what is beneath the pain I keep trying to escape? What would I discover if I stopped judging the feeling and simply looked at it? This is where one of Thich Nhat Hanh's most powerful images becomes important. He often spoke about flowers and garbage. A flower eventually becomes garbage. Garbage can become compost. Compost can nourish a flower. The two are not completely separate. In a Plum Village teaching, Thich Nhat Hanh described suffering and happiness in a similar way. He taught that they are organic realities that cannot simply be separated. He compared their relationship to flowers and garbage. This image changes the way we look at our inner life. Inside us, there can be flowers, peace, joy, love, understanding, and there can also be garbage, anger, fear, despair, jealousy, confusion. We may spend our lives trying to keep the garbage out, but that is not how a garden works. A garden contains both. The question is not whether garbage exists. The question is whether we know how to transform it. Thich Nhat Hanh taught that our suffering can become like compost. Not because suffering itself is beautiful. It is not. A broken heart is still painful. Loss is still loss. Loneliness is still difficult. But suffering can become the material from which understanding grows. A person who has known deep loneliness may develop a profound sensitivity to the loneliness of others. Someone who has suffered from anger may eventually understand how easily anger takes over the mind. Someone who has experienced loss may learn to cherish ordinary moments more deeply. The pain does not become beautiful simply because we give it a beautiful name. Something else happens. We transform our relationship with it. And through that transformation, something beautiful may grow. This is why Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching is not about pretending that suffering is good. It is about learning not to waste it. We often imagine happiness as the opposite of suffering. If happiness is present, suffering must be gone. If suffering returns, happiness must have failed. But Thich Nhat Hanh challenged this separation. In his teachings on the interbeing of suffering and happiness, he explained that suffering and well-being are deeply connected. We can appreciate happiness more deeply because we know suffering. And by looking deeply into suffering, we can discover its roots and transform it. Think about something very ordinary. A glass of water can become precious when you are truly thirsty. A peaceful morning can feel extraordinary after a period of chaos. The presence of someone you love can become much more meaningful after you have experienced loss. Suffering can reveal the value of what is already here. But there is an even deeper point. Happiness does not always require perfect circumstances. It can arise through the way we meet the present moment. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means recognizing that even in difficult circumstances, life is not made entirely of pain. There can still be a breath, a tree, a meal, a familiar voice, a moment of kindness, a small amount of peace. When suffering occupies the whole field of our attention, these things can become invisible. Mindfulness helps us see again. It does not erase the darkness. It allows us to notice that darkness is not the only thing that exists. This may be one of the most compassionate aspects of Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching. He does not ask us to choose between suffering and happiness. He asks us to understand their relationship, because the flower needs the compost, and the compost, in time, can become part of the flower. There may be things in your life you wish had never happened. A relationship that ended, a dream that failed, a period when you felt completely alone, a mistake you still remember, a version of yourself you are ashamed of. You cannot rewrite those moments, and you do not have to call them beautiful. Some experiences simply hurt, but perhaps you can ask a different question. What can this experience become? Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings repeatedly return to transformation. In his teachings on caring for the garden of body and mind, suffering is described as something that can be transformed into nourishment for peace and happiness. The garden contains both flowers and garbage, and mindfulness helps us care for both. This is a very different way of understanding healing. Healing is not necessarily becoming the person you were before the pain. Sometimes, healing means becoming more understanding because of what you have lived through, more compassionate, more awake, more gentle with yourself, more capable of recognizing suffering in another person. Your pain may never become something you would choose, but it does not have to remain meaningless. There is a quiet difference between saying, "This suffering was good for me," and saying, "I will not let this suffering be wasted." The first can deny the reality of pain. The second honors it. It says, "This happened. It hurt. I cannot change it. But I can learn to look deeply. I can understand what it revealed. I can allow that understanding to change how I live." And perhaps that is where something beautiful begins. Not in the suffering itself, but in the transformation that becomes possible when we finally stop running from it. Maybe the part of your life you most want to escape is not asking you to run faster. Maybe it is asking you to look more deeply, not to romanticize the pain, not to pretend that everything happens for a reason, not to force yourself to be grateful for what hurt you, just to become present enough to see what is here. Because in Thich Nhat Hanh's vision, a garden can contain both flowers and garbage, and one does not have to destroy the garbage to grow the flower. Sometimes it needs to be understood. Sometimes it needs to be held with compassion. And sometimes, with enough time and care, what once looked like waste becomes nourishment. So perhaps the question is not, "Why am I still suffering?" Perhaps it is, "What is this suffering asking me to understand?" And perhaps, somewhere beneath the pain, something within you is already beginning to bloom.